The entire village mocked Ada for being too muscular. They laughed whenever she walked through the market, whispered behind her back, and constantly reminded her that no man would ever want a woman who looked like her. While other young women were getting married and building families, Ada spent her days covered in sweat and soot, working beside a blazing forge. She was the strongest blacksmith in the kingdom, stronger than most men, but her strength became the very reason people looked down on her. But everything changed the day Prince Obina returned home after years of studying in America. When the king ordered the finest sword in the kingdom to be made, everyone pointed him toward Ada's workshop. The moment the prince saw her, he was captivated. While others saw a woman who was different, Obina saw courage, intelligence, kindness, and strength. As their friendship grew into love, they faced powerful enemies, royal opposition, jealousy, betrayal, and a battle that would test their hearts like never before. Could a woman the entire village laughed at become the future queen of the kingdom? Could true love overcome pride, status, and tradition? And what shocking secret would completely change the king's mind about the woman he refused to accept? Stay with me because this unforgettable story is filled with romance, heartbreak, revenge, and a powerful lesson about never judging someone by their appearance. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our amazing folktales and inspiring stories. Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into the incredible story. The village of Umuagu sat peacefully among the rolling hills of Enugu State. Surrounded by green forests, fertile farmland, and winding red earth roads, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. News traveled faster than the wind. Secrets rarely stayed hidden, and people always had something to say about somebody else. Among all the villagers, there was one person they talked about more than anyone else. Her name was Ada Nwosu. At 25 years old, Ada was unlike every other woman in Umuagu. While most women spent their days cooking, trading in the market, or preparing for marriage, Ada spent hers in front of a blazing furnace. She forged iron. She shaped steel. She built tools and weapons with her bare hands. And she possessed a physique that made people stare wherever she went. Ada stood taller than most women in the village. Her shoulders were broad. Her arms were thick with muscle. Years of lifting heavy iron, hammering steel, and working beside her father had transformed her into someone many villagers struggled to understand. When she walked through the market carrying iron bars that required two men to lift, people stopped what they were doing to watch. Some laughed, some whispered, some shook their heads. There goes Ada, the woman who thinks she's a man. No man will marry that one. Look at those arms. The comments followed her everywhere. First, they hurt. When she was younger, she would go home crying. But over the years, she learned to hide the pain. She learned to smile when people mocked her. She learned to pretend their words did not matter. Still, deep inside her heart, the wounds remained. One hot afternoon, Ada walked through the crowded village market carrying a bundle of iron rods across her shoulders. Several women sat beneath a large umbrella selling vegetables. As Ada passed, they lowered their voices. Unfortunately, not low enough. "Poor thing," one woman said. "What poor thing? She chose this life." Another laughed. "Look at her arms. If she isn't careful, she'll become stronger than every man in the village." The women burst into laughter. Ada kept walking. She had heard worse, much worse. But that didn't make it easier. As she continued toward her father's workshop, she noticed another wedding celebration taking place. Drummers played loudly. Women danced. Children ran around happily. The bride was one of her childhood friends. Ada paused for a moment. She watched as the young woman smiled beside her husband. The sight filled her with mixed emotions. She was happy for her friend, but she also felt a familiar ache in her chest. Almost all her friends were married now. Some already had children. Others were expecting their first babies. Meanwhile, Ada remained alone. Not because she lacked beauty. Many people admitted she had a pretty face. Her skin glowed beautifully beneath the sun. Her eyes were bright and intelligent. Her smile could light up a room. But most men never looked beyond her muscles. They saw her strength and became intimidated. Many were afraid she would embarrass them. Others simply could not imagine a woman who could outwork them. Ada sighed and continued walking. The heat from the afternoon sun felt mild compared to the heat waiting for her at the workshop. The moment she arrived, the familiar sounds welcomed her. Clang, clang, clang. The rhythmic sound of hammers striking metal echoed through the air. The workshop belonged to her father, Chukwuemeka Nwosu. For over 30 years, he had been known as the finest blacksmith in Umuagu. People came from neighboring villages to buy his tools. Farmers purchased his hoes and cutlasses. Hunters bought his traps and knives. Warriors ordered spears and swords from him. His reputation was legendary. Yet there was one thing people talked about almost as much as his skill. His daughter. Papa Chukwuemeka looked up as Ada entered. A smile immediately appeared on his face. "You're late." Ada laughed. "The market women delayed me with their gossip." Her father shook his head. "Still talking about you? They never stop. They are jealous." Ada rolled her eyes. "They aren't jealous, Papa. They are." He pointed toward the furnace. "Now stop talking and help me finish these orders." Ada immediately got to work. The furnace glowed bright orange. Heat radiated through the workshop. Sweat covered her forehead within minutes. She picked up a heavy hammer and grabbed a glowing piece of metal from the fire. Most people struggled to lift the hammer. Ada swung it effortlessly. Clang. Sparks exploded. Clang. The metal flattened. Clang. The shape slowly emerged. Her movements were smooth and confident. Years of experience had made her incredibly skilled. Her father watched proudly. There was a time when he taught her everything he knew. Now she had begun teaching him new techniques. And though he rarely admitted it openly, he knew the truth. Ada had become better than him. Much better. Later that evening, a farmer arrived to collect a new cutlass. He examined the blade carefully. His eyes widened. "This is excellent work." Ada smiled. "Thank you." The farmer nodded. "Is your father the one who made it?" Before Ada could answer, Chukwuemeka spoke. "No." The farmer looked surprised. "My daughter made it." The man's eyebrows rose. "Really? Every part?" The farmer inspected the blade again. "This is the finest cutlass I've ever owned." A proud smile spread across Ada's face. Moments like these reminded her why she loved her craft. Metal never judged her. Iron never laughed at her. Steel never cared whether she looked feminine enough. The forge accepted her exactly as she was. As the sun began setting, Ada and her father sat outside the workshop. The evening breeze felt refreshing after a long day beside the furnace. For a while, neither spoke. Then her father broke the silence. "You were watching that wedding earlier." Ada stared toward the distant horizon. "Was it obvious?" "Very." She sighed. "I just wonder sometimes." "Wonder what?" "If I'll ever get married." Her father's expression softened. "Ada, maybe they're right." "Who?" "The villagers." Immediately, Chukwuemeka frowned. "They are not right. Every man I meet eventually disappears." The old man placed a hand on her shoulder. "Listen to me carefully." Ada turned toward him. "You are one of the strongest people I know." She smiled weakly. "That's part of the problem." "No." His voice became firm. "It is not." He pointed toward the workshop. "You built half the tools used in this village." She remained silent. "You help feed families." Still silent. "You have a good heart." Her eyes lowered. "And any man who cannot see your value is blind." Tears threatened to form. She quickly looked away. The last thing she wanted was for her father to see her cry. Chukwuemeka understood anyway. He always did. "You'll find someone." Ada forced a smile. "Maybe." But deep down, she wasn't sure anymore. At 25, she had started losing hope. That night, after dinner, she sat outside her small room. The moon illuminated the village. Crickets chirped in the darkness. From somewhere far away, she could hear drums from another celebration, another wedding, another reminder of what she lacked. She looked down at her hands. Strong hands. Hands capable of shaping iron. Hands capable of lifting enormous weight. Hands capable of creating beautiful things. Yet somehow they seemed unable to attract love. A small tear rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. "No more feeling sorry for yourself," she whispered. Tomorrow would be another day. Another opportunity to work. Another opportunity to improve her craft. If marriage never came, she would still have her forge. She would still have her father. She would still have her purpose. Unknown to Ada, fate was already moving in ways she could not imagine. Far across the ocean, a young prince named Umuagu was preparing to return home after years of studying in America. His return would soon change the course of her life forever. The villagers who mocked her would one day regret their laughter. The men who ignored her would wish they had seen her worth. And the woman who believed she would never be loved was about to discover that destiny had a far greater plan for her than she ever dreamed. But for now, Ada sat beneath the moonlight, unaware of what lay ahead. She only knew one thing. Tomorrow she would return to the forge. Tomorrow she would shape iron. Tomorrow she would continue being herself. And sometimes, being yourself is the first step toward a miracle. The morning sun rose gently over the hills of Umuagu, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. Farmers were already heading to their fields. Traders prepared their stalls in the marketplace. Children chased one another through dusty paths while women swept their compounds. But unlike most mornings, there was an unusual excitement in the air. The entire village was buzzing with anticipation. Prince Umuagu was finally coming home. For years, stories about the prince had traveled across Umuagu. Ever since he left Nigeria to study in the United States, villagers eagerly followed every piece of news about him. They heard he attended one of the best universities in America. They heard he excelled in his studies. They heard he had become intelligent, disciplined, and respected. Now, after many years abroad, he was returning home. The king had announced a grand celebration. Every family in the village wanted to catch a glimpse of the future ruler. By mid-morning, crowds had already gathered near the palace road. Women wore their finest wrappers. Men dressed in colorful traditional attire. Drummers prepared their instruments. Dancers stood ready. The atmosphere felt like a festival. Meanwhile, several kilometers away, a black SUV moved steadily along the road toward Umuagu. Inside sat Prince Umuagu. At 28 years old, he had grown into a handsome young man. He was tall, athletic, and carried himself with quiet confidence. Yet despite his royal status, there was something humble about him. As he gazed through the window, familiar memories flooded his mind. The rivers where he used to swim, the forests where he hunted birds as a child, the market where he bought roasted corn with his friends. He had missed home more than he realized. America had given him education and experience. But Umuagu would always be his home. His driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Your Highness, we will arrive soon." Umuagu smiled. "I can't wait." As they approached the village entrance, the sound of drums reached them. His smile widened. "Looks like father has organized quite a celebration." The driver laughed. "The king has been counting down the days." A few minutes later, the convoy entered Umuagu. The crowd erupted immediately. People cheered. Women ululated. Children jumped excitedly. Drums thundered through the air. Umuagu stepped out of the vehicle and was instantly surrounded by joyful villagers. Many had watched him grow up. Others had not seen him in years. One elderly woman grabbed his hands. "My prince, look at you." Umuagu laughed. "Mama Ngozi, you haven't changed." The old woman shook her head. "I have become old." "You were saying that 10 years ago." Everyone laughed. For the next hour, Umuagu greeted villagers and exchanged stories with old friends. Unlike many princes, he did not act superior. He remembered names. He listened to people. He asked about their families. The villagers loved him for it. Eventually, palace guards escorted him toward the royal compound. As he entered the palace courtyard, he saw his father waiting. King Umuagu stood proudly in full royal attire. Though age had added gray hairs to his beard, He remained an imposing figure. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the king opened his arms. "My son." Obinna smiled. "Father." The two embraced warmly. The crowd applauded. The king stepped back and studied him. "You have become a man." Obinna laughed. "I should hope so. I've been gone for years." The king nodded proudly. "And I hear you have made me proud." "I did my best." "You did more than your best." The king placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have returned wiser than when you left." Together they entered the palace. The rest of the day was filled with celebrations. Traditional dancers performed. Chiefs gave speeches. Villagers presented gifts. A grand feast was prepared. Throughout it all, Obinna remained grateful and humble. Yet as evening approached, the king had something special planned. After dinner, he invited Obinna into the royal throne room. Only a few trusted chiefs were present. The atmosphere immediately became serious. The king sat upon his throne. "My son, there is something I wish to discuss." Obinna nodded. "I'm listening." The king smiled. "One day you will rule this kingdom." Obinna remained silent. "And every ruler deserves a symbol of authority." The king pointed toward an empty stand beside the throne. "A royal sword." Obinna looked at the stand thoughtfully. The king continued, "I want a sword forged specifically for you." The prince smiled. "That would be an honor." The king nodded. "It must be the finest sword our kingdom has ever seen." One of the chiefs stepped forward. "Your Majesty, there is only one person capable of creating such a weapon." The king looked at him. "And who is that?" The chief exchanged glances with the others. "Ada Nwosu." The king's eyebrows rose slightly. "The daughter of Chukwuemeka?" "Yes, your Majesty." Another chief spoke. "She has surpassed her father." The king leaned back. "Is she truly that skilled?" The chiefs nodded. "Without question. The finest blacksmith in Umuagu. The best in the region." The king stroked his beard thoughtfully. Finally, he nodded. "Very well." He turned toward Obinna. "Tomorrow we shall visit her workshop." The prince agreed. Though he had never met Ada, he was curious. Anyone capable of earning such praise must possess extraordinary talent. The following morning arrived bright and clear. After breakfast, the king and Obinna prepared for their visit. Several guards accompanied them as they traveled through the village. As they walked, villagers greeted them respectfully. Soon they left the main road and followed a path leading toward the blacksmith district. Even before they arrived, Obinna heard it. Clang, clang, clang. The powerful rhythm echoed through the air. As they drew closer, the sound grew louder. Then they reached the workshop. Heat radiated from the forge. Sparks flew through the air. The smell of burning charcoal filled the atmosphere. And standing beside the furnace was a woman unlike anyone Obinna had ever seen. Ada. She was working with complete focus. A glowing piece of metal rested upon an anvil. Sweat glistened across her skin. Muscles rippled beneath her arms as she swung a massive hammer. Clang! The force of the strike sent sparks exploding. Clang! The metal bent beneath her skillful hands. Clang! Another precise strike. Obinna stopped walking. For a moment the world seemed to slow. He had expected an elderly craftsman, perhaps a rugged old blacksmith with decades of experience. Instead, he found himself staring at a young woman. A woman whose strength was undeniable. Yet there was something graceful about her. Something captivating. Something completely unexpected. The king continued walking. Obinna remained frozen. One of the guards quietly cleared his throat. Only then did the prince realize he had stopped moving. He quickly followed. Ada finally noticed their arrival. Immediately, she lowered her hammer. "Your Majesty." She bowed respectfully. Then she turned toward Obinna. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Something strange passed between them, a feeling neither could explain. Ada quickly looked away. Prince or not, she wasn't accustomed to men staring at her. Especially not like that. The king smiled. "Ada Nwosu." "Yes, your Majesty. I have heard many impressive things about your work." "You honor me." The king gestured toward the forge. Is it true you have surpassed your father? Ada glanced toward Chukwuemeka, who stood nearby. Her father laughed. It is true. The king looked surprised. You admit this openly? Of course. Chukwuemeka smiled proudly. She became better years ago. Ada felt embarrassed. Papa, I'm only speaking the truth. The king chuckled. I admire your honesty. He then explained the purpose of their visit. When Ada learned she was being asked to forge a royal sword for Prince Obinna, her eyes widened. It was the greatest honor any blacksmith could receive. She immediately accepted. I will create the finest sword I have ever made. The king smiled. Excellent. While the adults discussed details, Obinna found himself studying Ada. Not rudely, simply observing. He noticed the confidence in her posture, the intelligence in her eyes, the passion with which she spoke about her craft. Unlike many women he had met abroad, Ada seemed completely comfortable being herself. She did not pretend. She did not seek approval. There was something refreshing about that. Meanwhile, Ada could feel his gaze occasionally drifting toward her. It made her nervous, not because he was a prince, but because he looked at her differently. Most men looked at her and saw only muscles, only strength, only what made her unusual. Yet somehow Obinna seemed genuinely interested. The feeling confused her. When the meeting finally ended, the king and prince prepared to leave. Before departing, Obinna stepped closer. I look forward to seeing the sword. Ada smiled politely. I won't disappoint you. Their eyes met again. For a brief second, neither looked away. Then Obinna smiled, a genuine smile, and something fluttered unexpectedly inside Ada's chest. As the royal party disappeared down the road, Chukwuemeka noticed the thoughtful look on his daughter's face. He smiled knowingly. What? Ada frowned. Nothing. You seem distracted. I'm not. Her father laughed. Of course. Ada rolled her eyes and returned to the forge. But throughout the rest of the day, she found herself thinking about the prince. Meanwhile, as Obinna returned to the palace, he could not stop thinking about the woman he had met. The blacksmith, Ada, the strongest woman he had ever seen, and perhaps the most fascinating. Neither of them realized it yet. But the meeting that morning would change both their lives forever. A royal sword had brought them together. Fate would do the rest. The morning after Prince Obinna's visit, Ada woke before sunrise. The village was still asleep when she stepped outside her room and breathed in the cool morning air. The sky was dark blue, and the first birds had just begun singing. Normally, Ada loved mornings. They were peaceful, quiet, free from gossiping villagers and curious stares. But today was different. For the first time in years, her thoughts were distracted. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the prince's face, his smile, his calm voice, the way he had looked at her. Ada quickly shook her head. Stop it, she muttered to herself. She had work to do, a lot of work. The future king of Umuagu had commissioned a royal sword, and she intended to create the finest weapon she had ever forged. No distractions, no daydreaming, no thoughts about princes. Yet despite her determination, her mind kept drifting back to him. She sighed and headed toward the workshop. The forge was already glowing when she arrived. Her father, Chukwuemeka, was adding charcoal to the furnace. He looked up and immediately noticed her unusual expression. You didn't sleep much. Ada frowned. How do you know? The old man laughed. I raised you. I'm fine. She knew that tone. It meant he didn't believe her. Luckily, he chose not to press further. Instead, he pointed towards several bars of steel stacked against the wall. The sword. Ada nodded. The project would require only the finest materials. A royal sword was not simply a weapon. It was a symbol, a legacy, something that could be passed down through generations. She selected the strongest steel she possessed. Then she began. The metal entered the furnace. The flames roared. Minutes later, the steel glowed bright orange. Ada lifted it with long tongs and placed it on the anvil. Clang! The hammer struck. Sparks exploded. Clang. Another strike. The workshop echoed with the sound of steel being shaped. Hours passed. Sweat covered her face and arms. Yet she never slowed. Piece by piece, the sword began taking form. By midday, several villagers had gathered outside the workshop. News had spread quickly. Everyone knew Ada was forging the prince's sword. Some watched in admiration. Others simply came to gossip. Among them were 3 women who never seemed to miss an opportunity to criticize her. One woman folded her arms. Imagine. Imagine what? Her friend asked. A blacksmith becoming famous because of a prince. The second woman laughed. Maybe she thinks the prince likes her. The group burst into laughter. Inside the workshop, Ada heard every word. She kept hammering. Clang. Pretending not to care. But deep inside, the comments still hurt. Why did people always assume the worst about her? Why couldn't they simply let her live? Her father noticed her expression. Without looking up from his work, he spoke. Ignore them. I'm trying. They have talked about you your whole life. Ada nodded. True. And look where you are. She smiled slightly. The old man was right. The same people mocking her were standing outside watching her create a sword for royalty. That thought made her feel a little better. As afternoon approached, a familiar voice spoke from the workshop entrance. Good afternoon. Ada looked up. Her heart nearly skipped a beat. Prince Obina. He stood at the doorway wearing simple traditional clothing. No royal attendants. No guards. Just him. The villagers outside immediately began whispering. The prince had come alone. Why? Obina smiled warmly. I hope I'm not interrupting. Ada tried to remain calm. Not at all, Your Highness. He stepped inside. The heat from the forge hit him immediately. You work in this every day? Every day. Obina looked genuinely impressed. It's hotter than I imagined. Ada laughed softly. You get used to it. The prince spent several minutes watching her work. Unlike the villagers, he wasn't staring because of her muscles. He seemed fascinated by the process itself. Every movement, every technique, every detail. Finally he spoke. How long have you been doing this? Since I was a child. Really? Ada nodded. My father started teaching me when I was 10. Obina glanced at Chukwamika. Most fathers teach their daughters cooking. The old man laughed loudly. She was never interested. Ada smiled. I preferred hammers. The prince laughed. The sound surprised her. It was warm and genuine. For a moment, they simply stood there smiling at one another. Neither seemed eager to break the moment. Eventually Obina pointed toward the unfinished blade. May I see it? Of course. He carefully examined the sword. Even in its unfinished state, it looked impressive. The blade was already elegant, balanced, powerful. This is incredible. Ada felt herself blush slightly. Praise from customers never affected her. But praise from Obina somehow felt different. Thank you. He looked at her. No. Thank you. She frowned. For what? For creating something that will probably outlive both of us. The statement caught her off guard. Most people viewed blacksmithing as simple labor. Obina viewed it as art. And that made her like him even more. After another hour of conversation, the prince finally left. The moment he disappeared down the road, the workshop felt strangely empty. Ada hated herself for noticing. The following day, Obina returned. And the day after that. And the day after that. At first, Ada assumed he was simply checking on the sword. But eventually she realized something. The prince always stayed longer than necessary. Far longer. One afternoon, after Obina left, her father crossed his arms. Ada immediately recognized the look on his face. What? The old man grinned. The prince likes you. Ada nearly dropped her hammer. Papa! What? That's ridiculous. Is it? Yes. He laughed. A prince doesn't visit a blacksmith every day because of a sword. He does if it's his sword. Ada rolled her eyes. Yet deep down she wondered if he might be right. Over the following weeks, the visits continued. And slowly, conversations replaced formalities. The prince no longer called her Ada Nwosu. He simply called her Ada. She stopped referring to him as Your Highness. Instead, she called him Obinna whenever they were alone. One afternoon, they sat beneath a tree during a break from work. For the first time, they weren't discussing swords. They were discussing life. "So tell me about America," Ada said. Obinna smiled. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." He laughed. "That's a lot. I have time." For hours he told her stories. About snow. About giant cities. About skyscrapers. About universities. Ada listened with fascination. Some of the things he described sounded almost unbelievable. When he finished, she shook her head. "The world is bigger than I thought." "It is." Then Obinna asked, "Have you ever wanted to leave Umuagu?" Ada thought for a moment. "Not really." "Why?" She looked toward her workshop. "My life is here." The forge, her father, the village, everything she loved. Obinna nodded thoughtfully. There was something admirable about that. Most people spent their lives chasing elsewhere. Ada appreciated what she already had. Days turned into weeks. Meanwhile, the sword neared completion. It was becoming the masterpiece Ada had envisioned. The blade shone brilliantly. Intricate symbols decorated the steel. The balance was perfect. Even Chukwuemeka admitted it was the finest weapon he had ever seen. One evening, as the sun began setting, Ada worked on the final details. The workshop glowed with golden light. Outside, birds flew across the horizon. The atmosphere felt almost magical. Obinna arrived shortly before sunset. As usual, he found a reason to stay. They talked while Ada polished the blade. At one point, their hands accidentally touched. Both froze. The contact lasted only a second. Yet neither pulled away immediately. Something passed between them. Something neither could ignore anymore. Eventually, Ada looked away. Her heart was racing. Obinna felt the same. The realization frightened him slightly. He had met countless women during his years abroad. Beautiful women, intelligent women, sophisticated women. Yet none had affected him like Ada. There was something about her strength, her kindness, her determination, her authenticity. She never pretended to be anyone else, and he admired that deeply. As darkness approached, Ada finally finished polishing the sword. She stepped back and admired her work. The blade gleamed beautifully. For several moments, nobody spoke. Even Obinna seemed awestruck. Then Chukwuemeka broke the silence. "Well," Ada looked at him. The old blacksmith smiled proudly. "You've done it." She stared at the sword. Months of work, years of training, countless hours of effort, all represented in one magnificent weapon. For a moment, emotion filled her chest. This wasn't just a sword. It was proof. Proof that she was more than the cruel words people used against her. More than the laughter. More than the rejection. More than the stereotypes. She was a master blacksmith. And no one could take that away from her. Obinna stepped beside her. "You should be proud." Ada smiled. "I am." The prince looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled too. And somehow that smile meant more to her than all the praise in the world. Neither of them knew exactly what was happening. Neither dared speak the truth aloud. But something had begun growing between them. Something stronger than friendship. Something neither could stop. And as the completed sword gleamed beneath the fading sunlight, fate quietly smiled. The weapon had brought them together. Love would keep them together. Though neither Ada nor Obinna realized it yet, their hearts had already started walking down the same path. A path that would soon change both their lives forever. The completed royal sword was presented to King Is 3 days later. The entire palace gathered inside the great hall to witness the unveiling. Chiefs sat proudly in their seats. Royal guards stood at attention. Palace servants lined the walls. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. At the center of the hall stood Ada and her father, Chukwuemeka. In front of them rested the sword, covered with a richly embroidered cloth. King Is sat upon his throne while Prince Obinna stood beside him. Although he had seen the sword several times during its creation, he was just as eager as everyone else. The king raised a hand. "Let us see the masterpiece." Ada stepped forward. Taking a deep breath, she removed the cloth. A collective gasp filled the hall. The blade gleamed beneath the sunlight pouring through the palace windows. Beautiful symbols decorated its surface. The polished steel reflected light like a mirror. Its craftsmanship was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Even the chiefs struggled to hide their amazement. King Is slowly rose from his throne. He descended the steps and examined the sword carefully. Minutes passed. No one spoke. Finally, the king looked up. "This is extraordinary." Relief flooded Ada's chest. The king lifted the sword. His balance was perfect. His craftsmanship flawless. For several moments he tested it before nodding approvingly. "You have honored this kingdom." The hall erupted into applause. Ada felt her cheeks warm. Praise never came easily from King Is. His approval meant everything. The king turned toward his son. "Obina." The prince stepped forward. King Is handed him the sword. "It now belongs to you." Obina accepted it respectfully. As he held the weapon, he found himself looking at Ada rather than the sword. Their eyes met. A smile appeared on both faces. It lasted only a second. But it did not go unnoticed. Several chiefs exchanged knowing glances. One elderly chief smiled to himself. He was old enough to recognize the look of two people falling in love. After the ceremony ended, the palace hosted a feast. Ada and her father were honored guests. For the first time in her life, Ada sat among royalty. Normally, she would have felt uncomfortable. Yet somehow Obina made everything easier. Whenever she seemed nervous, he found ways to make her laugh. Whenever she felt out of place, he included her in conversations. His kindness touched her deeply. As the evening progressed, she noticed something unusual. He spent more time talking to her than anyone else. Even the king began noticing. At first, King Is said nothing, but the thought lingered in the back of his mind. Meanwhile, Obina couldn't seem to stay away from Ada. After the feast ended, he walked her and her father toward the palace gates. The night air was cool and pleasant. Stars filled the sky. For a while, they simply talked about ordinary things. The harvest season, village festivals, blacksmithing, nothing important. Yet every conversation felt special. When they finally reached the gates, Chukwamika suddenly yawned. "I think these old bones need sleep." Ada laughed. "You've been saying that for years. And it's still true." The old man smiled mischievously. "I'll walk ahead." Before Ada could respond, he disappeared down the road, leaving her alone with Obina. She immediately realized what her father had done. The old man knew exactly what he was doing. For several seconds, silence hung between them. Neither seemed eager to leave. Finally, Obina spoke. "Your father likes embarrassing you." Ada laughed. "You have no idea." Their eyes met again. The familiar warmth returned. A warmth that seemed to grow stronger every day. Eventually, Obina said good night. But long after he returned to the palace, he found himself thinking about Ada. And Ada found herself doing the same. The following morning, Obina surprised everyone. Instead of spending his day in palace meetings, he visited Ada's workshop. Again, the villagers noticed immediately. Whispers spread through Umuagu. "The prince is visiting Ada. Again. That's the third time this week. Something is happening." By afternoon, nearly everyone in the village was discussing it. Ada heard the gossip. She tried ignoring it, but it wasn't easy, especially because part of her secretly enjoyed seeing Obina. That day, the prince arrived carrying a basket. Ada looked surprised. "What's that?" "A gift. For me." He nodded. She opened the basket. Fresh fruits, bread, and several books. Ada stared at the books. "You remembered." Obina smiled. "Of course." During one of their conversations, Ada had mentioned her love of reading. Most people were shocked when they learned that the Muscular Blacksmith spent evenings reading history and literature. Obina had remembered. The realization touched her deeply. Very few people paid attention to details about her. Most people only saw her appearance. Obina saw everything else. That evening they sat outside the workshop reading together. Hours passed before either noticed. As days turned into weeks, their friendship deepened. Soon it became impossible to deny what was happening. Even Chukwuemeka noticed. One afternoon he watched them laughing together beneath a tree. The old blacksmith smiled. A neighboring farmer approached him. "You seem happy." "I am." The farmer glanced toward Ada and Obinna. "Because of them?" Chukwuemeka nodded. The farmer sighed. "They look good together." "They do. But he's a prince." The old blacksmith's smile faded slightly. He knew the farmer was right. Royalty rarely married commoners, especially blacksmiths. Yet he chose not to think about that. Not today. For now his daughter was happy, and that was enough. Meanwhile, Obinna's feelings continued growing stronger. One evening he sat alone in his room staring out the window. His childhood friend, Amaka, entered. The moment he saw Obinna's expression, he laughed. "Oh no!" Obinna frowned. "What? You've fallen in love." The prince nearly choked. "What?" Amaka laughed harder. "You have." "I haven't." "You absolutely have." Obinna shook his head. Yet he couldn't deny the truth. His thoughts constantly returned to Ada. Her smile, her laugh, her determination, the way she never let the villagers break her spirit. Everything about her fascinated him. Eventually Amaka asked the question Obinna had been avoiding. "Do you love her?" Silence followed. Then Obinna smiled. "Yes." For the first time he admitted it aloud. And strangely it felt wonderful. The following day, Obinna visited the workshop once again. This time he found Ada lifting a massive piece of iron. Most men would have required help. Ada handled it alone. The prince watched in amazement. When she finally noticed him, she laughed. "What? You never stop surprising me." She placed the metal down. "Because I can lift heavy things?" "Partly." Ada rolled her eyes. Obinna stepped closer. "No. Because you're stronger than most people. Physically. In every way." The words caught her off guard. The villagers often mocked her strength. Obinna admired it. There was a huge difference. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt different. More intense. More personal. Finally Ada broke the silence. "You know everyone in the village thinks you're crazy." Obinna laughed. "Why?" "For spending so much time with a blacksmith." "I don't care." "You should." "I don't." His answer came so quickly that she couldn't help smiling. Then he added something unexpected. "Besides, you're my favorite person in Umuagu." Ada felt her heart race. She quickly looked away. Obinna wasn't sure what gave him the courage. Perhaps he was tired of hiding his feelings. Perhaps he simply wanted her to know. Whatever the reason, he didn't regret saying it. As the weeks passed, their bond became impossible to ignore. People stopped wondering if something was happening. Now they were certain. The prince and the blacksmith had fallen for each other. Some villagers supported them. Others mocked the idea. But neither Ada nor Obinna cared. One evening, as the sun began setting, they sat together on a hill overlooking the village. The sky burned orange and gold. Birds flew across the horizon. The view was breathtaking. For a long time they sat quietly, comfortable in each other's presence. Finally Obinna spoke. "Ada." She turned toward him. "Yes." "What is your biggest dream?" She thought carefully before answering. "No one has ever asked me that." "What is it?" Ada stared at the sunset. Then she smiled. "To be remembered." Obinna looked surprised. "That's all." She nodded. "When people talk about Ada Nwosu after I'm gone, I want them to remember that I lived honestly." The prince smiled. "They will." "What about you?" He looked toward the village. "I want to become a king my people can be proud of." "You will." Their eyes met. Neither looked away. The world seemed to disappear around them. The sounds of the village faded. The evening breeze softened. Only the two of them remained. Then Obinna slowly reached for her hand. Ada's breath caught. His fingers touched hers. Warm, gentle. Nothing like the rough hands she used for blacksmithing. For a moment she considered pulling away. Not because she wanted to, because she was afraid. Afraid of hoping, afraid of believing, afraid of getting hurt. But instead, she let her hand remain in his. A smile appeared on Obina's face, and a smile appeared on hers. In that moment, both finally understood what had been growing between them all these weeks. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't curiosity. It was love. Real, powerful, unexpected love. And as the sun disappeared beyond the hills of Umuagu, Prince Obina and Ada Nwosu sat hand in hand beneath the evening sky. Neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. Their hearts had already said everything. What neither of them realized was that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. Because while they had found love, convincing the king would be a very different battle. One that would soon test both their courage and their devotion. The news spread through Umuagu faster than wildfire. Prince Obina and Ada Nwosu were in love. At first, it was only whispers. Women discussed it while fetching water from the stream. Farmers spoke about it in their fields. Traders exchanged gossip in the marketplace. Before long, the entire village was talking about nothing else. Some people were happy. Others thought it was impossible. Many believed it would never work. After all, Ada was a blacksmith. Obina was a prince. In the eyes of many villagers, those two worlds were never meant to meet. Yet despite the rumors, neither Ada nor Obina tried to hide their feelings anymore. The prince continued visiting her workshop. They spent evenings talking beneath the trees. Sometimes they walked through quiet paths outside the village where they could escape curious eyes. For the first time in her life, Ada felt truly seen. Not as the muscular woman everyone mocked. Not as the village blacksmith. Not as the woman no one wanted to marry. But simply as Ada. And for the first time in many years she was genuinely happy. Unfortunately, happiness rarely remains hidden for long. One afternoon, King Ease sat inside the palace discussing village matters with his chiefs when one of them cautiously cleared his throat. "Your Majesty." The king looked up. "Yes." The chief hesitated. "There is something you should know." King Ease frowned. The man's nervousness immediately caught his attention. "What is it?" The chief exchanged glances with the others. Finally, he spoke. "It concerns Prince Obina." The king sat straighter. "What about him?" The chief took a deep breath. "The prince has become very close to Ada Nwosu." King Ease raised an eyebrow. "The blacksmith?" "Yes, your majesty." The king nodded slowly. He already knew Obina visited the workshop often. There was nothing unusual about that. Ada had forged his royal sword. Naturally, a friendship had developed. Still, the expression on the chief's face suggested something more. "Continue." The chief swallowed. "The village believes they are in love." Silence filled the throne room. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the king laughed. A short, dismissive laugh. "That's ridiculous." The chiefs remained silent. The king's smile slowly faded. "You are serious?" One chief nodded. "Very serious, your majesty." King Ease's expression darkened. He leaned back in his throne. His mind immediately rejected the idea. His son was the future king of Umuagu, the heir to the throne, the man who would one day lead their people. Surely he wouldn't choose a blacksmith as his wife. Would he? The king suddenly realized he wasn't entirely certain. And that troubled him. Very much. That evening he sent for Obina. The prince arrived shortly after sunset. He entered the throne room calmly. "You wish to see me, father?" King Ease studied him carefully. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the king got straight to the point. "I have heard rumors." Obina immediately understood. His expression changed. The king noticed. That alone told him everything. About Ada. The prince remained silent. King Ease sighed heavily. "So it is true." Obina looked directly at his father. "Yes." The king closed his eyes briefly. The answer felt like a blow. When he opened them again, his voice was firm. "Tell me this is a passing attraction." "It isn't." The king's jaw tightened. "Then tell me you're being foolish." "I'm not." The king stood. Slowly, deliberately, his frustration began rising. "You are a prince. I know. You are heir to this throne. I know. Then explain to me why you are pursuing a blacksmith. Obinna met his father's gaze. Because I love her. The words echoed through the room. For a moment, King Ease simply stared at him. Love. The word carried enormous weight. The king had hoped this was merely infatuation, a temporary fascination, something that would fade with time. But love? That was far more dangerous. The king slowly sat back down. No. Obinna blinked. No. No. The king's voice became colder. I will not allow it. The prince stared at him. You cannot decide who I love. I can decide who enters this royal family. Anger flickered across Obinna's face. Ada is a good woman. I never said she wasn't. She's honorable. I agree. She's intelligent. Yes. Then what's the problem? The king slammed his hand against the arm of his throne. The problem is that she is not royal. The room fell silent. Obinna's expression hardened. King Ease continued. She is a commoner. The prince shook his head. That shouldn't matter. It matters greatly. The king rose again. His voice echoed through the throne room. A king must think beyond his own feelings. Obinna crossed his arms. And what exactly am I supposed to think about? Politics. Politics. Alliances. Father. The future of this kingdom. The king pointed toward the palace windows. Everything we have built. Obinna stared at him. So you want me to marry for strategy? I want you to marry wisely. The prince laughed bitterly. And Ada isn't wise? The king's expression softened slightly. This isn't about her. Then what is it about? The answer came immediately. The throne. The words hung heavily between them. Neither spoke. The silence stretched. Finally, Obinna shook his head. No. King Ease frowned. No. I won't give her up. The king's patience snapped. You will. I won't. You must. I refuse. The argument exploded. Voices rose. Accusations flew. For the first time in years, father and son stood completely opposed, neither willing to back down. Eventually, Obinna turned toward the door. The king's voice thundered behind him. If you continue this relationship, you will regret it. Obinna stopped. For a moment, he considered responding. Then he simply walked away. The palace doors slammed shut behind him. Back at the workshop, Ada sensed something was wrong immediately. Obinna arrived later than usual. His expression was tense, his smile absent. The moment she saw him, concern filled her heart. What happened? Obinna sighed. My father knows. Ada froze. The smile vanished from her face. Oh, she had expected this moment eventually, but somehow hearing it made everything feel real. What did he say? Obinna laughed humorlessly. What do you think? The answer was obvious. Ada looked away. For years she had experienced rejection, mockery, judgment. Perhaps she should have expected this too. Still, it hurt. More than she wanted to admit. Obinna stepped closer. Ada. She didn't look at him. He said no. I know. But I don't care. Finally she looked up. You should. No. Obinna. I love you. The words stopped her. His eyes never left hers. I'm not walking away. Emotion filled Ada's chest. Yet fear remained. Your father is a king. You're a prince. And I'm... She struggled to finish the sentence. A blacksmith. Obinna shook his head. No. He gently took her hand. You're Ada. A tear formed in the corner of her eye. The prince continued. The strongest woman I know. She smiled weakly. You keep saying that. Because it's true. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ada asked the question she feared most. What if he never accepts me? Obinna's answer came without hesitation. Then he'll have to accept my decision. The confidence in his voice comforted her. But deep down, she knew the battle was only beginning. Meanwhile, inside the palace, King Ease sat alone. Sleep refused to come. His thoughts kept returning to Obinna. And Ada. The king wasn't a cruel man. In fact, he respected Ada greatly. Her talent was undeniable. Her character was admirable. Yet the idea of his son marrying a commoner felt wrong. Not because of who Ada was, but because of what the marriage represented. Or at least that's what he told himself. Still, another voice whispered inside his mind. A voice he didn't want to hear. Was he truly protecting the kingdom? Or was he protecting his pride? The question troubled him. Unfortunately, rather than listening to that voice, he chose another path. A dangerous path. The next morning, King Ease summoned several trusted advisors. I have made a decision. The advisors listened carefully. The prince must marry royalty. One chief nodded. A wise choice. The king continued. I want suitable candidates identified immediately. Within days, messengers were traveling between kingdoms. Royal families received invitations. Discussions began. Plans were made. And soon one name emerged above all others. Princess Amaka, daughter of a powerful neighboring king. Beautiful, elegant, royal by birth. Everything the king believed a future queen should be. When King Ease heard her name, he smiled. This was the solution. Once Obina met the princess, he would surely forget about Ada. Or so the king believed. Far away, unaware of these plans, Ada and Obina sat together beneath their favorite tree. The evening breeze rustled the leaves above them. For a little while, they pretended everything was normal. Pretended there was no king standing between them. No expectations. No obstacles. Just two people in love. But fate had already begun moving. And soon, Princess Amaka would arrive in Umuagu. When she did, the battle for Obina's heart would truly begin. And neither Ada nor Obina could imagine just how difficult that battle would become. The morning Princess Amaka arrived in Umuagu, the entire village seemed to wake up earlier than usual. Women swept their compounds before sunrise. Men gathered along the roads discussing the latest news. Children ran through the village shouting excitedly. Everyone wanted to see the royal guest. Inside the palace, preparations had been underway for days. The royal courtyard had been decorated with colorful fabrics. Fresh flowers lined the pathways. Musicians rehearsed traditional songs. Servants hurried from one corner of the palace to another carrying trays, decorations, and gifts. King Ease stood proudly on the palace balcony overlooking the activity. For the first time in weeks, he felt hopeful. He believed he had finally found the solution to the problem threatening his plans for the kingdom. Princess Amaka, beautiful, educated, royal by birth, the daughter of a respected king. Everything a future queen should be. Surely once Obina met her, he would understand why this marriage made sense. Surely he would forget about Ada. The king smiled to himself. At least that was what he hoped. Meanwhile, Prince Obina sat in his chambers staring out the window. Unlike everyone else, he felt no excitement. In fact, he was annoyed. Very annoyed. He knew exactly why Princess Amaka was coming. His father had not hidden his intentions. The princess wasn't arriving as a guest. She was arriving as a potential bride. The entire situation felt unfair. Nobody had asked what he wanted. Nobody seemed to care that his heart already belonged to someone else. A knock sounded at the door. Enter. His friend Amaka walked inside. One look at Obina's face made him laugh. You look like a man walking to his execution. Obina groaned. That's exactly how I feel. Amaka sat down. The princess arrives today. I know. You should at least try to be polite. I will be polite. Amaka smiled. Good. But I'm not interested. His friend laughed. I didn't say you had to marry her. Obina shook his head. I love Ada. The words came naturally now. He no longer hesitated when speaking her name. Every day his feelings for her seemed to grow stronger. Amaka's smile softened. I know. Obina looked out the window again. And nothing is going to change that. Across the village, Ada was already hard at work. The furnace roared. The familiar sound of hammer against steel echoed through the workshop. Clang, clang, clang. Sweat glistened on her muscular arms as she shaped a new farming tool. Her father watched quietly from nearby. Eventually he spoke. The princess arrives today. The hammer stopped. Ada sighed. Everyone keeps talking about it. They say she's very beautiful. Ada forced a smile. I'm sure she is. Her father studied her carefully. You seem worried. I'm not worried. The old man raised an eyebrow. Ada. She lowered the hammer. For a moment, she stared at the glowing metal on the anvil. Then she finally admitted the truth. What if she wins? Her father frowned. Wins what? Obina. The words came out softer than she intended. Chukwuemeka immediately walked over. Ada. She looked away. She's a princess. So? She's everything I'm not. The old blacksmith sighed. He hated seeing his daughter doubt herself, especially after everything she had overcome. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Listen to me. Ada looked at him. If Obina loves you, no princess can change that. But, no. His voice became firm. You have spent your entire life letting other people tell you what you are worth. She remained silent. I'm tired of hearing you repeat their lies. The words struck her deeply. Her father continued. You are kind. You are talented. You are honorable. And anyone who cannot see your value does not deserve you. A small smile appeared on Ada's face. No matter how old she became, her father's words always comforted her. Unfortunately, the doubts remained, because deep down she knew the truth. Princesses and blacksmiths lived in very different worlds. By midday, the entire village had gathered near the palace entrance. Drummers lined the road. Dancers waited excitedly. Chiefs stood in ceremonial clothing. When the royal convoy finally appeared in the distance, cheers erupted. The procession was magnificent. Decorated horses, royal guards, colorful banners fluttering in the breeze. And at the center was Princess Amaka's carriage. The moment it stopped, every eye focused on the door. A servant stepped forward and opened it. Princess Amaka emerged gracefully. The crowd gasped. She was undeniably beautiful. Her skin glowed beneath the sunlight. Her elegant dress sparkled with expensive embroidery. Jewelry decorated her neck and wrists. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to admiration. The villagers immediately began whispering. She's beautiful. Absolutely stunning. Perfect for a prince. King Is smiled proudly. This was exactly the reaction he wanted. As Amaka approached the palace entrance, she bowed respectfully. Your Majesty. King Is welcomed her warmly. You honor our kingdom with your presence. The honor is mine. Then her eyes moved toward Obina, the future king, the man she had heard so much about, and she immediately understood why. He was handsome, confident, strong, the perfect royal husband. A smile appeared on her face. She liked what she saw. Unfortunately, Obina's reaction was very different. He smiled politely. Nothing more. No excitement. No fascination. No spark. Simply politeness. Princess Amaka noticed immediately, and she wasn't used to being ignored. The welcoming ceremony lasted several hours. Throughout it all, Amaka made repeated attempts to engage Obina in conversation. She asked about his studies in America. She complimented his achievements. She laughed at his jokes. Or at least she tried. But no matter what she did, his responses remained formal and distant. The more she tried, the more frustrated she became. That evening, a grand banquet was held inside the palace. Musicians performed. Servants carried endless trays of food. Nobles and chiefs filled the hall. Princess Amaka sat beside Obina. King Is watched hopefully. Surely now they would connect. Instead, the prince spent most of the evening staring out the window. Finally, Amaka decided to speak directly. You seem distracted. Obina smiled politely. A little. Thinking about something? Someone. The princess felt a flicker of irritation. Someone? The prince nodded. A smile appeared on his face. Not the polite smile he had given her all evening. A real smile. A genuine smile. The kind that comes from the heart. Princess Amaka immediately knew. There was another woman. And judging by that smile, she was in trouble. The following day, Amaka decided to investigate. She was accustomed to getting what she wanted. If another woman stood in her way, she intended to find out who it was. By afternoon, palace servants were already sharing information. The name reached her quickly. Ada Nwosu, the blacksmith. At first, Amaka thought there had been a mistake. Surely not. Not a blacksmith. Not a commoner. Not a woman who worked with iron and fire. Yet every servant told the same story. The prince visited her constantly. The prince spoke about her often. The prince was in love with her. Princess Amaka laughed. A loud, disbelieving laugh. This has to be a joke. But nobody laughed with her. Because it wasn't a joke. The realization irritated her deeply. She had expected competition from another princess. Perhaps the daughter of a wealthy chief. Not a blacksmith. The idea felt insulting. The next morning, curiosity got the better of her. Without informing anyone, Amaka left the palace accompanied by 2 attendants. She followed directions through the village until she reached the blacksmith district. The sound of hammering guided her the rest of the way. Clang, clang, clang. Finally, she saw Ada. The muscular blacksmith stood beside a blazing furnace shaping metal. Sweat covered her face. Her powerful arms moved with practiced confidence. Princess Amaka stared. For several moments, she didn't know what to think. Ada certainly wasn't what she expected. The blacksmith looked strong enough to challenge most men in the village. Yet there was also something striking about her. Something genuine. Something real. The princess hated herself for noticing. Then Ada looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, silence hung between them. 2 women from completely different worlds. One born into royalty, the other born into hard work. Neither looked away. Finally, Ada nodded politely. Good afternoon. Amaka forced a smile. Good afternoon. The interaction lasted only seconds. Yet, when the princess returned to the palace, she felt strangely unsettled. Because for the first time, she understood why Obina liked Ada. Not because Ada was royal. Not because she was wealthy. Not because she was beautiful in the traditional sense. But because she possessed something many royals lacked. Authenticity. And despite all her confidence, Princess Amaka realized something uncomfortable. Winning Obina's heart might be far more difficult than she expected. Meanwhile, as the sun set over Umuagu, Prince Obina sat beneath his favorite tree with Ada. They laughed together while discussing a book he had recently given her. Neither noticed the palace servant watching from a distance. The servant quickly returned to report what he had seen. And when Princess Amaka received the report, her jaw tightened. The prince wasn't simply interested in Ada. He was completely in love. For the first time since arriving in Umuagu, Princess Amaka felt something she rarely experienced. Jealousy. And jealousy, once planted, has a dangerous way of growing. Far more dangerous than anyone realized. Especially Ada. Because although the princess had arrived with smiles and royal manners, a storm was already beginning to form behind those beautiful eyes. And that storm would soon bring trouble to the peaceful village of Umuagu. The days following Princess Amaka's arrival grew increasingly tense. Although she continued smiling in public and behaving like the perfect royal guest, something had changed. Beneath her elegance, frustration was growing. Every day she tried to get closer to Prince Obina. Every day she failed. She invited him to stroll through the palace gardens. He politely declined. She invited him to join her during meals. He made excuses. She attempted conversations. He answered respectfully but briefly. No matter what she did, she could not capture his attention. The most painful part was that she knew exactly why. Ada, the blacksmith, the woman she considered beneath her, the woman Obina loved. One afternoon, Princess Amaka stood on a palace balcony overlooking the village. A servant stood nearby. "Where is the prince today?" she asked. The servant hesitated, answered carefully. "At Ada's workshop, Your Highness." Amaka's jaw tightened. Again, every time she asked about Obina, the answer was always the same. Ada, Ada, Ada. It was becoming unbearable. The princess dismissed the servant and remained alone on the balcony. For several moments, She stared toward the blacksmith district. Anger slowly burned inside her chest. In her kingdom, men competed for her attention. Princes sought her hand in marriage. Nobles wrote poems praising her beauty. Yet here in Umuagu, a prince ignored her for a woman who spent her days hammering iron. The humiliation was impossible to accept. Meanwhile, Ada remained completely unaware of how much resentment was building inside the princess. That afternoon she was busy working on a large farming contract. Several farmers had ordered new tools before the planting season. The workshop buzzed with activity. The furnace roared. The air shimmered with heat. Workers moved around carrying materials. Clang, clang, clang. Ada's hammer rose and fell rhythmically. Sweat glistened on her powerful arms. Nearby, her father supervised several apprentices. Everything seemed normal, peaceful. Then suddenly one of the apprentices rushed inside. Ada. She looked up. Yes. The young man appeared nervous. There's someone here to see you. Ada frowned. Who? Before he could answer, a familiar voice interrupted. Me. The entire workshop fell silent. Princess Amaka stood at the entrance. 2 attendants accompanied her. The sight immediately drew attention. Workers stopped what they were doing. Farmers exchanged confused looks. Even Chukwamika paused. Nobody expected a princess to visit a blacksmith's workshop. Especially not this princess. Ada carefully placed her hammer down. Princess Amaka. The princess smiled. At least it looked like a smile. But there was no warmth in it. I hope I'm not interrupting. Ada wiped sweat from her forehead. Not at all. For several moments, neither woman spoke. The atmosphere felt strange, uncomfortable. Everyone present could sense it. Amaka slowly walked through the workshop. Her eyes moved across the furnace. The tools, the anvils, the piles of iron. Clearly, this environment was foreign to her. Finally, she stopped in front of Ada. I've heard a great deal about you. Ada nodded politely. And I've heard much about you. The princess folded her arms. I'm sure you have. The comment carried a sharp edge. Ada noticed immediately. So did everyone else. Yet she chose not to react. Years of enduring gossip had taught her patience. Princess Amaka continued. You're certainly different from what I expected. Ada smiled slightly. I hear that often. The princess looked her up and down. Her gaze lingered on Ada's muscular frame. Then she laughed softly. I imagine you do. The insult was subtle, but everyone understood it. Several workers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Chukwamika frowned. Yet Ada remained calm. The princess seemed disappointed by her reaction. She had expected anger. Instead she found composure. That only irritated her more. For nearly 20 minutes, Amaka remained at the workshop. She asked questions, made observations, offered compliments that sounded suspiciously like insults. Through it all, Ada remained respectful. Eventually the princess left. But the moment she was gone, the workers began whispering. Something is wrong. Very wrong. That woman hates Ada. Chukwamika agreed. Unfortunately, the old blacksmith suspected this was only the beginning. He was right. Over the next week, Princess Amaka's frustration continued growing. Every attempt to win Obina's affection failed. The prince remained distant, polite, respectful, uninterested. Meanwhile, his relationship with Ada continued strengthening. One evening, Amaka accidentally witnessed them together in the village square. They were laughing, smiling, completely lost in each other's company. The sight made her blood boil. For the first time in her life, she felt truly rejected. And she blamed Ada. The following morning, Amaka woke in a terrible mood. Her attendants immediately noticed. One of them cautiously asked, Your Highness, are you all right? No. The princess stared at her reflection. I am tired of being ignored. The attendant wisely said nothing. Amaka suddenly stood. Prepare my carriage. The attendant blinked. Where are we going? The princess's eyes hardened. To the workshop. An hour later, she arrived. This time she wasn't interested in politeness. She wasn't interested in appearances. She wanted confrontation. The moment she entered the workshop, everyone sensed trouble. Ada was working alone near the furnace. Most of the workers were outside unloading supplies. Chukwamika had gone into the village to deliver an order. The timing couldn't have been worse. Princess Amaka marched directly toward Ada. Her attendants struggled to keep up. Ada looked up. Immediately she noticed the difference. The princess was furious. "What happened?" Ada asked calmly. Amaka stopped a few feet away. "You happened." Ada frowned. "I don't understand." "Don't pretend." The princess's voice rose. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." The blacksmith remained silent. Amaka took another step forward. "The prince belongs with me." Ada's eyes widened slightly. "Obina belongs to nobody." The answer only made the princess angrier. "You think you're special?" "No." "You think you're worthy of becoming queen?" Ada sighed. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" The blacksmith looked directly at her. "Love." The word hit Amaka like a slap. Love. The very thing she couldn't compete against. The princess laughed bitterly. "You really believe a prince will choose you?" Ada didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. Something inside Amaka finally snapped. Before anyone could react, she stepped forward and slapped Ada across the face. The sound echoed through the workshop. Smack! Everything froze. The attendants gasped. Several workers rushed inside after hearing the noise. Everyone stared in shock. A red mark appeared on Ada's cheek. Silence filled the workshop. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The princess stood breathing heavily. For a moment, she looked almost surprised by what she had done. Then she lifted her chin proudly, as though daring Ada to respond. The blacksmith slowly turned her head back toward her. Her expression remained calm, but the workers knew something important. Ada could easily overpower the princess. Easily. The difference in strength was almost ridiculous. If Ada wanted, she could lift Amaka off the ground with one arm. If Ada wanted, she could throw her across the workshop. Everyone knew it, including Amaka. For a brief moment, fear flashed across the princess's face, because she suddenly realized exactly how vulnerable she was. The workshop grew silent. People held their breath, waiting, watching, expecting violence. Instead, Ada simply stared at the princess. Then she spoke quietly. "Are you finished?" The question stunned everyone. Even Amaka looked confused. Ada continued. "I won't fight you." The princess blinked. "What?" "I said I won't fight you." "Why not?" Ada looked at her sadly. "Because you're hurting." The answer caught everyone off guard, especially Amaka. The princess's face reddened. "Don't pity me." "I don't." "Then fight back." Ada shook her head. "No." "Why?" The blacksmith's voice remained calm. "Because strength isn't about hitting people." The words hung in the air. For the first time, Amaka had no response. The workshop workers exchanged glances. They had witnessed many things over the years, but they had never seen restraint like this. Eventually Amaka turned away. Her anger had not disappeared, but something else had appeared alongside it. Embarrassment. Deep embarrassment. Without another word, she stormed out of the workshop. Her attendants hurried after her. Moments later, she was gone. The silence remained. Finally, one worker spoke. "Ada." She looked at him. "Why didn't you defend yourself?" The blacksmith touched her cheek. Then she smiled. "Because not every battle needs to be fought." The workers stared at her in admiration. Chukwamika returned shortly afterward and immediately learned what happened. His face darkened. "She slapped you?" Ada nodded. The old blacksmith was furious, but even he couldn't help feeling proud. His daughter had shown extraordinary self-control. Unfortunately, the story spread through Umuagu before sunset. By evening, everyone knew. The princess had slapped Ada, and Ada had refused to fight back. The villagers couldn't stop talking about it. Some admired Ada's restraint. Others called her foolish. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Princess Amaka sat alone in her room. For the first time, guilt began creeping into her thoughts. She had expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt strangely ashamed, because deep down she knew the truth. Ada had won, not by fighting, not by arguing, but by refusing to become the person Amaka wanted her to be. And although neither woman realized it yet, the incident was about to have enormous consequences. Because word of the confrontation was already traveling toward the one person whose reaction would matter most, Prince Obina. And when he learned what the princess had done, the peace inside the palace would shatter completely. The news reached Prince Obina before sunset. He had spent most of the afternoon meeting with village elders regarding farming projects and road repairs. The discussions had lasted much longer than expected, and by the time he finished, he was looking forward to visiting Ada's workshop. As he stepped outside the council building, he noticed something unusual. People were staring at him, whispering, exchanging nervous glances. First, he ignored it. Then his friend Amaka came running toward him. The expression on his face immediately made Obina uneasy. "What happened?" the prince asked. Amaka stopped in front of him, breathing heavily. "You haven't heard?" "Heard what?" The hesitation in Amaka's eyes made Obina's stomach tighten. "What happened?" Amaka swallowed. "It concerns Ada." The prince's expression changed instantly. "What about her?" "The princess visited the workshop." Obina frowned. "Princess Amaka?" Amaka nodded. A terrible feeling began forming in the prince's chest. "What happened?" The answer came quietly. "She slapped Ada." For a moment the world seemed to stop. The sounds of the village faded. The conversations around him disappeared. All Obina heard were those three words. "She slapped Ada." His jaw tightened. Slowly, dangerously. Amaka immediately noticed the change in his friend's expression. "Obina." The prince didn't answer. His eyes darkened. "Tell me exactly what happened." Within minutes, Amaka explained everything. The confrontation, the insults, the slap, Ada's refusal to fight back, the workers who witnessed it, the gossip spreading throughout the village. Every detail made Obina angrier. By the time Amaka finished speaking, the prince's hands were clenched into fists. "Where is Ada now?" "At the workshop." Without another word, Obina turned and began walking. Fast, very fast. Amaka hurried after him. "Obina, calm down." The prince didn't respond. His pace increased. People stepped aside as he passed. Villagers immediately sensed something was wrong. The future king rarely displayed anger. When he did, it was impossible to miss. By the time he reached the blacksmith district, a small crowd had already begun following him. Word traveled quickly. People knew exactly where he was going. And they knew why. When Obina entered the workshop, the room fell silent. Ada looked up from her work. The moment she saw his face, she knew. He had heard. The prince walked directly toward her. His eyes immediately found the faint mark still visible on her cheek. His anger intensified. "Is it true?" Ada sighed. "Obina, is it true?" His voice was sharper than usual. The blacksmith nodded slowly. "Yes." The prince closed his eyes briefly, as though trying to control himself. It wasn't working. When he opened them again, fury burned behind them. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ada set down her hammer. "Because I knew how you'd react." "You were right." Several workers quietly moved farther away. Nobody wanted to be caught in the middle of this conversation. Obina took a deep breath. Then another. Still, his anger remained. "She hit you." "I'm fine." "That's not the point." Ada stepped closer. "It wasn't worth causing problems." Obina stared at her in disbelief. "Not worth causing problems?" "Obina, she attacked you." The prince rarely raised his voice. Hearing him do so startled everyone, including Ada. She gently touched his arm. "Please calm down." The gesture softened him slightly, only slightly. His gaze dropped to her hand, then returned to her face. "You could have defended yourself." Ada smiled faintly. "You know I could have." "Then why didn't you?" The answer came without hesitation. "Because that's what she wanted." Obina frowned. Ada continued. "She wanted a fight." The prince remained silent. If I had fought back, everyone would have focused on that. She shook her head. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Obina sighed. Part of him admired her restraint. Another part wanted to storm through the palace walls. The second part was currently winning. Ada immediately recognized the look in his eyes. No, the prince blinked. No, I know that look. A small smile appeared despite the situation. You do? Yes. She crossed her arms. You're planning something. The prince smiled back. But there was very little humor in it. Maybe. Ada pointed a finger at him. Don't. The smile disappeared. I can't ignore this. Obina. She had no right. Ada knew she was losing this argument. The prince had made up his mind. She could see it. And once Obina made up his mind, he was remarkably stubborn. Almost as stubborn as she was. Eventually she sighed. Just don't do anything reckless. The prince leaned closer. I can't promise that. Before Ada could respond, he turned and left the workshop. The crowd outside quickly moved out of his way. Everyone knew where he was heading. The palace. And judging by his expression, the confrontation ahead was not going to be pleasant. The walk back to the palace felt shorter than usual. Every step fueled Obina's anger. Not because Ada had been hurt physically. He knew she could handle herself. What angered him was the disrespect, the cruelty, the fact that someone had humiliated the woman he loved. By the time he reached the palace gates, servants were already whispering nervously. Word of his mood had arrived before he did. One guard stepped forward. Your Highness, where is Princess Amaka? The guard immediately straightened. In the royal gardens. Obina didn't wait for further explanation. He headed straight there. The gardens were quiet. Birds sang among the trees. Flowers bloomed beautifully along the pathways. Princess Amaka sat beneath a shaded pavilion drinking tea. She looked completely relaxed. Until she saw Obina. The expression on his face instantly wiped away her smile. The prince approached. Fast. Purposefully. Dangerously. For the first time since arriving in Umuagu, Princess Amaka felt genuinely nervous. Obina. His answer was cold. What did you do? The princess swallowed. She had hoped he wouldn't hear about the incident. At least not immediately. Clearly that hope had been foolish. It wasn't what you think. The prince stopped in front of her. Then explain. Amaka stood, trying to regain some confidence. We had a disagreement. A disagreement? Yes. The prince laughed bitterly. Is that what you're calling it? The princess looked away. Obina's voice hardened. You slapped her. Silence. The lack of denial was answer enough. The prince stepped closer. You had absolutely no right. Amaka's temper flared. And she has no right stealing you from me. The words hung in the air. Obina stared at her. Then he shook his head. Finally he understood. This had never been about Ada. Not entirely. It was about pride. About rejection. About not getting what she wanted. You still don't understand. The princess frowned. Understand what? I was never yours. The answer struck like a hammer. Amaka's face paled. Obina continued. I never encouraged you. His voice remained calm, but that calmness somehow felt even more devastating. I never pursued you. The princess couldn't respond. The truth hurt too much. I treated you respectfully. He nodded, as any decent person should. Then his expression darkened again. But you crossed a line. The princess felt genuine fear now. Not physical fear. Obina would never harm her. But fear of what came next. The prince's voice echoed through the garden. Listen carefully. Amaka remained silent. You will never touch Ada again. The command was unmistakable. Not a request. Not a suggestion. A warning. The princess looked stunned. Obina continued. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Several servants nearby pretended not to listen. They failed completely. Every word was being heard. Every word would become gossip before nightfall. Amaka felt humiliated. Yet for the first time she realized she deserved it. The prince's eyes never left hers. "If anything like this happens again, I won't stay silent." The princess lowered her head. She couldn't even look at him, because deep down, she knew she had lost. Not just the argument, not just the confrontation, everything. Obina's heart already belonged to Ada, and nothing she did would change that. Unfortunately, their conversation did not remain private. By evening, the entire palace knew what had happened. Servants whispered in corridors. Guards exchanged stories. Chiefs discussed the confrontation during dinner. Even King Is eventually heard about it. The king immediately summoned Obina. When the prince entered the throne room, his father looked troubled. "I hear there was an incident." Obina remained standing. "There was." King Is sighed. "You confronted the princess." "Yes." The king rubbed his temples. "Obina," the prince interrupted. "No, father." King Is looked surprised. Obina rarely interrupted him. The prince continued. "What happened was wrong." The king remained silent. Ada did nothing. Still silent. "She was attacked because of me." The king looked away. For the first time he felt uncomfortable. Because he couldn't deny the truth. Princess Amaka's behavior had been unacceptable. Yet admitting that felt dangerously close to admitting something else. Perhaps he had misjudged Ada. The thought lingered in his mind. Long after Obina left. Long after the throne room became empty. Meanwhile, back at the workshop, Ada sat outside beneath. The village had finally grown quiet. The forge was cold. The day's work was finished. Her father sat beside her. For a while neither spoke. Then Chukwamika smiled. "The prince loves you very much." Ada laughed softly. "Yes." The old blacksmith nodded. "He marched to that palace like a warrior heading into battle." She smiled. The image was amusing and strangely comforting. For most of her life, she had faced every challenge alone. Now someone stood beside her. Someone willing to fight for her. Not because she was weak, but because he cared. As Ada gazed up at the stars, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Because despite the king's objections, despite the princess's jealousy, despite the gossip and obstacles, she and Obina were still standing together. And sometimes, love grows strongest when tested. Neither of them knew it yet, but a far greater scandal was about to shake the palace. One that would change everything. One that would finally reveal Princess Amaka's true character. And when that truth emerged, nothing in Umuagu would remain the same. The days following Obina's confrontation with Princess Amaka were uncomfortable for everyone in the palace. The princess no longer walked through the palace with the same confidence she once carried. The servants noticed. The guards noticed. Even King Is noticed. For the first time since her arrival, Amaka seemed unsettled. Whenever she saw Obina, she avoided his gaze. Whenever his name was mentioned, her expression darkened. Yet despite everything that had happened, she refused to leave. A part of her still hoped things would somehow change. Perhaps Obina would eventually forget Ada. Perhaps the king would force the marriage. Perhaps fate would intervene. Unfortunately for Amaka, fate had other plans. And those plans were about to destroy everything. Meanwhile, life in Umuagu continued. At the workshop, Ada focused on her work. The planting season was approaching, and farmers were placing more orders than ever. The forge remained busy from sunrise until sunset. Clang, clang, clang. The familiar rhythm echoed through the village daily. Ada welcomed the distraction. Work helped keep her mind away from the palace drama. Even though she loved Obina deeply, she hated being the source of conflict between him and his father. One evening, as she polished a newly forged machete, her father sat nearby sharpening tools. "You seem thoughtful." Ada smiled. "I've been told that before." Chukwamika chuckled. "You are worried." "A little." "About the king?" Ada nodded. The old blacksmith sighed. "The king is stubborn." Ada laughed. "Like his son." "Exactly." They both smiled. Yet despite the humor, the concern remained. King Is still opposed the relationship. and nobody knew how long the conflict would continue. At the palace, the king faced similar worries. He sat alone in the throne room late one evening, staring at the royal sword Ada had forged. The weapon hung proudly on display beside the throne. Every time he looked at it, he was reminded of her talent, her dedication, her character. The more he reflected on recent events, the more uncomfortable he felt. Princess Amaka had struck Ada, yet Ada had refused to retaliate. The king had expected arrogance from a commoner pursuing a prince. Instead, Ada had displayed dignity, more dignity than many royals. The thought bothered him, because it challenged everything he believed. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter." One of his advisors stepped inside. "Your Majesty." The king nodded. "What is it?" "The princess requests permission to host a gathering tomorrow evening." King Is frowned. "A gathering?" "Yes." The advisor smiled. "She wishes to improve relations with the palace staff and nobles." The king considered it. "Very well." The advisor bowed. "As you wish." After he left, King Is returned his attention to the sword. He had no way of knowing that the gathering would become the beginning of a disaster. The following evening, Princess Amaka's gathering took place inside one of the palace reception halls. Music played softly. Food and drinks filled long tables. Nobles mingled with palace staff. The atmosphere appeared cheerful, at least on the surface. Amaka moved gracefully through the crowd, smiling, laughing, playing the role everyone expected. Yet inside she felt trapped. She hated being ignored. She hated losing. Most of all, she hated seeing Obina's love for Ada grow stronger every day. Throughout the evening, she repeatedly attempted to engage the prince in conversation. The results remained disappointing. Obina was polite, nothing more. His heart clearly belonged elsewhere. After an hour, frustration overwhelmed her. She excused herself and left the reception hall, needing fresh air, needing space, needing to escape. As she wandered through the palace corridors, she encountered someone unexpected. One of the palace guards. His name was Ifani. Unlike most guards, he was young and remarkably handsome, tall, athletic, charming. Over the past several weeks, he and Amaka had exchanged occasional conversations. Nothing serious, nothing inappropriate, at least not initially. But tonight both felt vulnerable, and vulnerable people often make foolish decisions. Ifani bowed respectfully. "Your Highness." Amaka sighed. "You don't need to bow every time you see me." The guard smiled. "It's difficult to stop." For the first time that evening, Amaka genuinely laughed. The sound surprised even her. Ifani noticed. "You seem happier." "I'm not." The guard hesitated. Then he spoke carefully. "Is it because of the prince?" Amaka froze. Normally she would have been offended. Instead she simply looked away. That answer told him everything. The guard sighed. "You deserve better." The words caught her off guard. For weeks, everyone had treated her like a political solution. A royal bride, princess. Nobody had asked how she felt. Nobody except this guard. Amaka felt an unexpected warmth. A dangerous warmth. The kind that clouds judgment. The conversation continued longer than it should have. Then longer still. Eventually they found themselves alone in a quiet section of the palace. Away from the reception. Away from the guests. Away from watching eyes. Or so they believed. Meanwhile, Prince Obina had spent most of the evening enduring the gathering for his father's sake. After an hour, he quietly slipped away. He had no interest in parties. His thoughts were already drifting toward Ada. He planned to visit her workshop early the next morning. As he walked through the palace corridors, he noticed something unusual. Laughter, coming from a secluded area. At this hour, that part of the palace should have been empty. Curious, he followed the sound. The laughter came again. Then a familiar voice. "Princess Amaka." Obina frowned. What was she doing here? As he approached a nearby room, he heard another voice. A man's voice. His curiosity deepened. The prince pushed open the door and froze. For a moment he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Princess Amaka stood in the arms of a palace guard. Not standing close, not simply talking, embracing, intimately. The moment the door opened, both turned in horror. Amaka's face drained of color. Ifani stumbled backward. The room fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The princess stared at Obinna. Her worst nightmare had just come true. The prince's expression hardened. Not because he loved her. He didn't. But because he immediately understood the consequences. This wasn't merely inappropriate. This was a scandal. A massive one. Especially considering the king's plans. The guard dropped to his knees. "Your Highness." Obinna raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes remained fixed on Amaka. The princess looked terrified. For the first time since arriving in Umuagu, all her confidence had vanished. Finally she found her voice. "Obinna," the prince interrupted. "No." The single word carried immense disappointment. Amaka looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Obinna turned and left the room. Without another word. The princess felt panic rise inside her. She hurried after him. "Obinna, wait." The prince didn't stop. "Please." Still he kept walking. The princess's voice trembled. "It isn't what it looks like." That finally made him stop. Slowly, he turned toward her. The expression on his face made her wish she had remained silent. "Really?" The question was ice cold. Amaka couldn't answer, because they both knew the truth. The prince shook his head, then continued walking, straight toward the throne room. The moment Amaka realized where he was going, true fear took hold. "No!" She rushed after him. "Obinna, please." But it was too late. Several minutes later, Prince Obinna burst into the throne room. King Ease looked up in surprise. "My son." Obinna's expression immediately alarmed him. "What happened?" The prince didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath, then spoke. "Father." The king stood. "What is it?" Obinna looked directly at him. "You need to see something." The seriousness in his voice made the king uneasy. Without another question, he followed. Several chiefs who happened to be nearby joined them. Wordlessly, Obinna led the group through the palace corridors. Behind them, Princess Amaka followed. Pale, terrified, desperate. King Ease noticed her expression. His concern deepened. Eventually they reached the room. The guard remained exactly where Obinna had left him. Still kneeling. Still terrified. The moment King Ease entered and saw the scene, understanding struck him instantly. His face darkened. The chiefs gasped. The silence that followed felt endless. No one spoke. No one moved. Finally the king turned toward Amaka. The disappointment in his eyes hurt far more than anger. The princess immediately fell to her knees. "Your Majesty!" The king raised a hand, silencing her. His voice trembled with fury. "Enough!" The room remained silent. King Ease looked around. At the guard. At the princess. At the chiefs witnessing everything. Then he closed his eyes. Shame washed over him. Not because he loved Amaka. Not because he cared about the marriage. But because this scandal had occurred inside his palace. Inside his home. Under his roof. And worst of all, involving the very woman he had insisted was worthy of becoming queen. The irony was unbearable. Slowly, the king opened his eyes again. And for the first time he began questioning every decision he had made, including his refusal to accept Ada, because the woman he had rejected for being a commoner had displayed honor, while the woman he had chosen for being a princess had brought disgrace. The realization struck harder than any weapon. And deep inside, something began changing. Something that would soon alter the future of Umuagu forever. Silence filled the room. The palace guard remained on his knees. Princess Amaka stood trembling nearby. King Ease stared at them both, his face dark with disappointment. The chiefs who had followed the king into the room exchanged uneasy glances. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody wanted to speak first. The shame hanging over the room felt almost physical. For several long moments, the only sound was the distant singing of birds outside the palace windows. Finally, King Ease spoke. His voice was calm, Too calm. The kind of calm that often comes before a storm. Everyone leave. The chiefs immediately obeyed. The servants disappeared. Even Prince Obina stepped back toward the door. But before leaving, he looked once at Princess Amaka. There was no anger in his eyes anymore. Only disappointment. The princess lowered her gaze. She could not bear to look at him. Moments later, only King Ease, Princess Amaka, and the guard remained in the room. The king slowly approached the young guard. "What is your name?" The guard swallowed nervously. "Ifani, your majesty." King Ease nodded. "How long has this been happening?" The guard hesitated. Fear flashed across his face. "Answer me." The king's voice became sharper. "A few weeks, your majesty." The answer struck the king like a slap. A few weeks, while he was planning a royal marriage, while he was arguing with his son, while he was rejecting Ada. The princess he had chosen already had another man. King Ease turned toward Amaka. She stood completely still. Her confidence had vanished. The proud princess who had arrived in Umuagu with her head held high was nowhere to be seen. Only a frightened young woman remained. The king spoke quietly. "Is this true?" Amaka closed her eyes. There was no point denying it. "Yes." The word barely escaped her lips. King Ease looked away. The disappointment he felt was overwhelming. Not because he expected perfection, but because he had defended her, promoted her, chosen her, and now she had brought shame into his palace. Finally the king pointed toward the door. "Return to your room." Amaka looked up. "Your Majesty." "Now." The princess flinched. She bowed her head and hurried away. The moment she disappeared, the king turned back to the guard. "Leave." Ifani immediately rose. "Thank you, your majesty." The king's expression hardened. "Do not thank me." The guard froze. King Ease pointed toward the exit. "Go." Within seconds, he was gone. The king was finally alone. For a long time, he simply stood there, thinking, reflecting, questioning everything. His thoughts drifted toward Ada. Again. The blacksmith. The woman he had judged. The woman he had rejected. The woman who had shown dignity every step of the way. And then his thoughts returned to Amaka, the princess, the woman he believed was worthy of becoming queen. The comparison was impossible to ignore. The more he thought about it, the worse he felt. For the first time, he began wondering if he had been wrong all along. The following morning, word of the scandal remained hidden from the village. King Ease had ordered absolute secrecy. No servant was to speak of what happened. No guard was to discuss it. No chief was to repeat it. Yet secrets inside a palace rarely stayed hidden for long. Whispers had already begun. And whispers have a way of becoming stories. Inside her room, Princess Amaka sat silently near a window. She had barely slept. Her eyes were swollen from crying. For the first time in years, she felt utterly defeated. A knock sounded. One of her attendants entered. "Your Highness." Amaka didn't respond. The attendant hesitated. "The king wishes to see you." The princess closed her eyes. She had been expecting this. Slowly, she stood. Her legs felt weak. Each step toward the throne room felt heavier than the last. When she finally entered, King Ease sat waiting. Several chiefs were present. Prince Obina stood nearby. The moment Amaka saw him, fresh shame washed over her. The king motioned toward the center of the room. She obeyed. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then King Ease broke the silence. "Princess Amaka." She lifted her head. The king's expression remained stern. "When you arrived in Umuagu, you came as an honored guest." Amaka nodded slowly. "I welcomed you into my home." Another nod. "I treated you with respect." Tears began forming in her eyes. The king sighed. "And this is how you repay that hospitality?" The princess looked down. Unable to answer, King Ease continued. "You have embarrassed yourself." His voice remained calm. "You have embarrassed your family." The tears started falling. "And you have embarrassed this palace." The room fell silent. Amaka could no longer hold back her emotions. "I am sorry." The words came out broken. "I truly am." The king studied her carefully. For a moment he saw something he hadn't noticed before. Not arrogance. Not pride. Just regret. Genuine regret. Still, some actions carried consequences. And this was one of them. Finally King Is spoke. There will be no marriage. The princess closed her eyes. The words hurt, even though she already knew. There will be no engagement. Silence. No future here. More silence. The king's voice became final. You will return to your kingdom. The decision echoed through the throne room. No one argued. No one objected. The matter was settled. Princess Amaka had fallen. Preparations for her departure began immediately. Royal servants packed her belongings. Horses were prepared. Guards organized an escort. The atmosphere throughout the palace felt heavy. Many people pitied her. Others believed she deserved her fate. But nobody celebrated. The situation was simply too sad. That afternoon, King Is summoned his most trusted scribe. The elderly man arrived carrying writing materials. The king sat at his desk. I need a message delivered. The scribe nodded. To whom, your majesty? To King Namdi, Princess Amaka's father. The scribe immediately understood. The king began dictating. Every word was carefully chosen. Respectful, honest, direct. The letter explained everything. The inappropriate relationship, the discovery, the cancellation of the proposed marriage. The king made no attempt to hide the truth. Neither did he exaggerate it. When the letter was complete, he sealed it with the royal seal. The message would accompany Amaka back to her kingdom. The thought brought him no satisfaction, only sadness, because he knew how painful the letter would be for her father to read. Meanwhile, in the village, Ada remained completely unaware of what was happening. She spent the day working at the forge. The familiar rhythm helped clear her mind. Clang, clang, clang. Sparks flew through the air. The furnace glowed brightly. Life felt normal, until Prince Obinna arrived. The moment she saw his expression, she knew something had happened. What's wrong? The prince smiled. Nothing is wrong. Ada immediately narrowed her eyes. That's not true. Obinna laughed. You know me too well. She set down her hammer. What happened? The prince hesitated. Then he told her. Everything. The secret relationship. The discovery. The confrontation. The king's decision. By the time he finished, Ada stared at him in disbelief. You're serious? He nodded. She shook her head slowly. Part of her felt shocked. Part of her felt sad for Amaka. And part of her couldn't help seeing the irony. The princess had mocked her, attacked her, believed herself superior. Yet now everything had collapsed. Chukwamika, who had been listening nearby, sighed. Life has a way of revealing people's true character. Nobody disagreed. 2 days later, Princess Amaka's departure arrived. The entire palace gathered to see her off. Not because they wished to embarrass her, but because tradition demanded it. The princess emerged wearing simple travel clothes. Gone were the extravagant dresses. Gone was the proud confidence. She looked tired, older somehow. As she approached her carriage, she noticed Obinna standing nearby. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she surprised him. I'm sorry. The prince blinked. Amaka continued. For everything. The apology sounded sincere. Completely sincere. Obinna nodded slowly. I hope you find happiness. The princess managed a small smile. And I hope you marry the woman you love. The words caught him off guard. But before he could respond, she turned away. Moments later, the carriage began moving. The royal escort followed. Slowly, Princess Amaka disappeared down the road leading out of Umuagu. And just like that, she was gone. That evening, King Is stood alone on a palace balcony, watching the sunset. The village stretched beneath him. The same village he had ruled for many years. The same village where Ada lived. The blacksmith. The woman he had spent months opposing. The woman who had done nothing wrong. The king sighed deeply. For weeks he had blamed Obinna, blamed Ada, blamed love itself. Yet now he was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The problem had never been Ada. The problem had been his own pride. He had judged her because she was a commoner, because she worked with her hands, because she wasn't royal. And every event since then had proven him wrong. The realization was impossible to escape. For the first time, King Ease seriously considered something he never thought possible. Perhaps Ada truly was worthy of becoming queen. The thought lingered in his mind as darkness settled over Umuagu. And with that thought came another, a decision, one he would soon share with his son. A decision that would change Ada's life forever. Because the king's heart was finally beginning to change. And soon, the greatest obstacle standing between Ada and Obinna would disappear. The departure of Princess Amaka marked the end of one chapter in Umuagu. But it also marked the beginning of another. For the first time in months, peace returned to the palace. The tension that had filled the hallways slowly disappeared. Servants smiled more freely. The chiefs no longer whispered nervously during meetings. Even Prince Obinna seemed lighter. Yet one important issue remained unresolved. King Ease still had not spoken openly about Ada. Although his heart had begun to change, he had not yet admitted it aloud. And every day that passed made him feel more ashamed. The king had spent months standing in the way of his son's happiness. Months judging a woman he barely knew. Months allowing pride to guide his decisions. Now that pride felt like a heavy stone resting on his chest. One evening, after a long day of meetings, King Ease sat alone in the royal courtyard. The sun was beginning to set. Orange light stretched across the palace walls. For a long time, the king simply sat there, thinking, reflecting, regretting. His eyes eventually drifted toward the royal sword hanging near the throne room entrance. The sword Ada had forged. The masterpiece that had impressed the entire kingdom. The symbol that had unknowingly brought Ada and Obinna together. The king sighed. Every time he looked at the sword, he was reminded of his mistake. Not because of the weapon itself, but because of the woman who created it. He remembered the first day he met Ada. The determination in her eyes. The respect she had shown him. The confidence she carried. The king had admired those qualities. Yet somehow he convinced himself they didn't matter. Because she was a commoner. Now he realized how foolish that had been. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Father!" The king looked up. Prince Obinna stood nearby. The king gestured toward an empty chair. "Sit." Obinna obeyed. For several moments neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. Both men knew an important conversation was approaching. Finally King Ease broke the silence. "You have been avoiding me." Obinna laughed softly. "You noticed." "I notice everything." The prince smiled. That part was true. King Ease remained quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been weighing on his heart. "Do you still love her?" Obinna immediately knew who he meant. "Ada." The answer came without hesitation. "Yes." The king nodded slowly. "I thought so." The prince looked surprised. No argument followed. No criticism. No lecture. Nothing. The king simply sat there, thinking. Finally he spoke again. "I owe you an apology." Obinna blinked. The words caught him completely off guard. The king rarely apologized. In fact, Obinna couldn't remember the last time it happened. The prince stared at his father. The king looked away briefly, as though gathering courage. Then he continued. "I was wrong." Silence filled the courtyard. The words felt almost unbelievable. King Ease sighed deeply. "I spent so much time worrying about titles." His gaze shifted toward the horizon. "I worried about status, about tradition, about what other kings would think." Obinna remained silent. The king continued. "And in doing so, I ignored what truly mattered." The prince listened carefully. "A person's character." The words struck him deeply. King Ease shook his head. "I judged Ada before I truly knew her." Regret filled his voice. "I saw a blacksmith." The king looked at his son. "You saw a good woman." For a moment, neither spoke. Then something unexpected happened. The king smiled. A small smile, but genuine. "I think you were right." Emotion rose in Obinna's chest. For months he had dreamed of hearing those words. Yet now that they had finally come, he barely knew what to say. The king leaned back in his chair. "Do you know what finally changed my mind?" Obinna shook his head. The king laughed softly. "Your stubbornness." The prince smiled. "I learned it from you." That made the king laugh even harder. Then his expression grew serious once more. "No," he said quietly. "What changed my mind was Ada." The prince listened. King Ease continued. "She never insulted me. She never demanded approval. She never tried to manipulate anyone." The king shook his head again. "Even when she was mistreated, she behaved with dignity." The image of Ada refusing to strike Princess Amaka returned to his mind. The memory still impressed him. "I realized something." The king's voice softened. "A queen is not made by royal blood." Obinna looked at him carefully. The king smiled. "A queen is made by character." The words carried enormous weight. For the first time, father and son stood on the same side. The conflict that had divided them for months was finally ending. King Ease placed a hand on Obinna's shoulder. "My son." Obinna looked at him. "You have my blessing." For a moment, the prince couldn't speak. The words felt unreal. After everything they had been through, after all the arguments, after all the obstacles, his father had finally accepted Ada. A smile slowly spread across Obinna's face. Then another thought struck him. "Ada doesn't know." The king laughed. "Then why are you still sitting here?" Obinna was already standing before the sentence finished. The king watched as his son practically ran from the courtyard. For the first time in many months, King Ease felt at peace. The journey to Ada's workshop felt shorter than ever. Obinna moved quickly through the village. Several villagers greeted him. He barely noticed. His mind focused on only one thing: Ada. As he approached the blacksmith district, the familiar sounds reached him. Clang, clang, clang. The workshop was busy as usual. The furnace glowed brightly. Workers moved between stations. Sparks danced through the air. And at the center of it all stood Ada. Her powerful arms moved rhythmically as she shaped a piece of iron. The sight instantly brought a smile to his face. For a moment he simply watched her, thinking about everything they had endured together. The gossip, the king's opposition, Princess Amaka, the uncertainty, all of it. And now, finally, things were changing. Ada looked up. The moment she saw him, she smiled. Then she noticed the unusual excitement in his eyes. Immediately she became suspicious. "What happened?" Obinna laughed. "Why do you always assume something happened?" "Because that look means something happened." The prince shook his head. "You know me too well." She set down her hammer. "Obinna." He stepped closer, the smile never leaving his face. "Ada." Now she was really curious. "What is it?" The prince took a deep breath, then spoke the words she never expected to hear. "My father changed his mind." Everything stopped. The sounds of the workshop seemed to disappear. The workers faded into the background. Even the heat of the forge felt distant. Ada stared at him, unable to speak, unable to move. "What?" Obinna smiled wider. "He accepts us." The words hit her like a wave. For a moment, she thought she had misunderstood. Surely she had heard wrong. The king? King Ease? Accepting her? It seemed impossible. Obinna gently took her hands. "It's true." Tears immediately filled her eyes. "No." The prince laughed softly. "Yes." Ada shook her head, still struggling to believe it. "He really said that?" "He did." The first tear rolled down her cheek. Then another. Then another. For years she had grown accustomed to rejection. Mockery. Judgment. Being told she wasn't enough. Not feminine enough. Not beautiful enough. Not worthy enough. Now the most powerful man in Umuagu had finally seen her for who she truly was. The emotional weight became overwhelming. Without warning, she threw her arms around Obinna. The prince laughed as he embraced her. Nearby workers immediately began cheering. Several apprentices started clapping. One farmer shouted loudly, "About time!" Everyone laughed. Even Chukwamika, The old blacksmith had witnessed the entire conversation, and tears had quietly appeared in his own eyes. His daughter had suffered so much over the years. Now, at last, happiness was finding her. A few moments later, Ada finally released Obina. She wiped her eyes, then laughed through her tears. "I can't believe this." The prince smiled. "Believe it." Before she could respond, another voice interrupted. "Ada." Everyone turned. King Ease stood at the entrance of the workshop. The entire building fell silent. Nobody had expected the king himself to arrive. Ada immediately straightened. "Your Majesty." The king slowly walked forward. His expression was calm, warm, almost fatherly. For a moment he simply looked at her. Then he spoke. "Ada Nwosu." She swallowed nervously. "Yes, Your Majesty." The king took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology." The workshop became even quieter. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. King Ease continued. "I judged you unfairly." The words shocked everyone, especially Ada. The king lowered his head slightly, a gesture nobody ever expected to see. "I am sorry." Tears immediately returned to Ada's eyes. The king looked around the workshop, at the tools, the furnace, the life Ada had built through hard work. Then he looked back at her. "You are stronger than I realized." Ada smiled softly. "I've heard that before." The king laughed. Then he extended his hand. "I would be honored if you joined our family." The tears finally spilled freely. Ada accepted his hand. And in that moment, years of pain seemed to disappear. The woman the village had laughed at. The woman no man wanted to marry. The blacksmith everyone underestimated, had finally earned the respect she deserved. And as the sun set over Umuagu, one thing became clear. The greatest battle of Ada's life was finally over. The wedding of Prince Obina and Ada Nwosu could now begin. And it would become a celebration the village would never forget. The news spread through Umuagu faster than any rumor the village had ever heard. Prince Obina was marrying Ada Nwosu, the blacksmith, the woman the villagers had laughed at for years, the woman many people said would never find a husband, the woman who had spent most of her life being told she wasn't feminine enough, beautiful enough, or worthy enough. Now she was about to become a princess. People could hardly believe it. Every marketplace conversation seemed to revolve around the same topic. "Did you hear? It's true. The king approved it himself. Ada is marrying Prince Obina." Some people smiled with genuine happiness. Others felt embarrassed, because many of the same people now celebrating her success had once mocked her. They remembered the jokes, the whispers, the cruel comments, and now they wished they could take those words back. Meanwhile, inside the blacksmith workshop, Ada was struggling to process everything. Even weeks after King Ease's apology, it still felt unreal. One moment she had been a village blacksmith worried she might never marry. The next, she was preparing for a royal wedding. The change was overwhelming. One afternoon, she sat outside the workshop watching the sunset. Her father sat beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Then Chukwuemeka smiled. "You know, when you were 10 years old, you told me something." Ada laughed. "I said a lot of things when I was 10. The old man chuckled. "One day you came into the workshop and announced that you were going to become the greatest blacksmith in Nigeria." Ada covered her face. "Oh no." "Yes." The old man laughed. "And then you said something else." She groaned. "What?" "You said if no man wanted to marry you, you would marry your hammer." Ada burst into laughter. Even Chukwuemeka struggled to stop laughing. "I actually said that?" "You did." The old man wiped tears from his eyes. "And now look at you." His voice softened. "My little girl is marrying a prince." Emotion filled Ada's chest. She leaned her head gently against her father's shoulder. "Thank you." The old blacksmith looked surprised. "For what?" "For believing in me when nobody else did." Tears appeared in Chukwuemeka's eyes. "I always believed in you." The simple answer meant more than words could express. Throughout her life, her father had never treated her like she was strange, never treated her like she was less than other women, never told her to change who she was. He had simply loved her. And because of that, she had survived years of criticism. The wedding preparations soon transformed the entire village. Tailors worked day and night. Decorators filled the palace with colorful fabrics. Musicians rehearsed for hours. Chefs prepared enormous quantities of food. Everyone wanted the wedding to be perfect. King Is personally oversaw many of the arrangements. To the surprise of many villagers, he had become one of Ada's strongest supporters. Whenever someone questioned the marriage, the king immediately defended her. Character matters more than status. He repeated the phrase often. Eventually people stopped questioning him. The king had made his position clear. Ada belonged in the royal family, and anyone who disagreed would have to accept it. One evening, Obina visited Ada during a break from the wedding preparations. The two sat beneath their favorite tree overlooking the village. The same tree where they had spent countless hours talking. The same tree where they had first admitted their love. The breeze was cool. The atmosphere peaceful. Obina smiled. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Ada laughed. "Of course. You barely looked at me. I was working. You were avoiding me. I was not. You absolutely were." Ada rolled her eyes. The prince laughed. Then his expression softened. "You know what I remember most?" "What?" "The way you looked while forging that sword." Ada frowned. "Really?" Obina nodded. "You looked completely fearless." She smiled. "I wasn't fearless. You looked it." For a moment they sat quietly. Then Obina took her hand. "I'm glad I met you." Ada smiled. "I'm glad you needed a sword." Both laughed. Neither could imagine how different their lives would have been otherwise. The wedding day finally arrived, and it was unlike anything Umuagu had ever witnessed. Before sunrise, the village was already awake. People traveled from neighboring communities to attend. The roads filled with visitors. Drums echoed throughout the kingdom. The atmosphere felt magical. Inside her room, Ada stood before a mirror. For perhaps the first time in her life, she felt nervous. Not because of the crowd. Not because of becoming a princess. But because today marked the beginning of a new life. A knock sounded. The door opened. Several women entered, including some of the very women who had once mocked her. Years earlier, their presence would have upset her. Now she simply smiled. One elderly woman stepped forward. Tears filled her eyes. "Ada." The blacksmith turned. The woman looked ashamed. "I owe you an apology." The room fell silent. The elderly woman continued. "I wasn't kind to you." Ada remained quiet. "I judged you." The woman's voice trembled. "I laughed when others laughed." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry." Several other women lowered their heads. Clearly they felt the same. For a moment, Ada simply stared at them. Then she smiled. A warm smile. "I forgave you a long time ago." The women began crying. Not because she had scolded them, but because she hadn't. The kindness humbled them. As they helped prepare her for the ceremony, many silently reflected on how wrong they had been. The strongest person in the village wasn't strong because of her muscles. She was strong because of her heart. Outside the palace, thousands of people gathered. Colorful decorations filled every corner. Musicians played joyful songs. Dancers moved through the crowd. The excitement was overwhelming. Then the ceremony began. When Prince Obina appeared, cheers erupted. The future king looked proud and happy. But the loudest reaction came a few minutes later. When Ada arrived, the entire crowd fell silent. For a moment, nobody spoke. The woman who stepped forward looked nothing like the lonely blacksmith they remembered. She looked radiant, confident, beautiful, yet somehow still unmistakably Ada. King Is watched from his throne with pride. Beside him stood Chukwuemeka. The old blacksmith's eyes were already wet with tears. When Ada reached the front of the ceremony grounds, her gaze found Obina's. The prince smiled. The nervousness instantly disappeared. Because no matter how many people surrounded them, she knew one thing. They were facing this moment together. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. Vows were exchanged. Blessings were offered. Traditional customs were performed. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. King Ease rose. The crowd immediately grew quiet. The king looked at the thousands gathered before him. Then he spoke. Today, we celebrate more than a marriage. His voice echoed across the grounds. We celebrate a lesson. People listened carefully. The king continued. For years, many people judged Ada. Several villagers lowered their heads, including some of the loudest critics. They judged her because she was different. The king paused. They were wrong. Complete silence followed. King Ease smiled toward Ada. This woman possesses more honor, strength, and character than many people born into privilege. Emotion filled Ada's eyes. The king continued. I nearly made the same mistake. The admission shocked many people. But she taught me something important. He looked toward the crowd. A person's worth is not determined by status. The king pointed toward Ada. It is determined by character. Thunderous applause erupted. The crowd cheered louder than ever before. Many people cried. Others smiled. And some felt deeply ashamed of how they had treated her. At that moment, every insult, every cruel joke, every rejection, every painful memory seemed to disappear, because the entire village finally saw Ada for who she truly was. Not a woman who failed to fit in, but a woman who never gave up. The celebration continued long into the night. Food flowed endlessly. Music filled the air. People danced beneath the stars. The entire kingdom rejoiced. Late that evening, Ada and Obina quietly slipped away from the crowd. They walked toward the hill overlooking Umuagu. Their hill. The place where they had shared countless conversations. The place where their love had grown. Together they sat beneath the stars. The village lights glowed below them. For a while neither spoke. Finally Obina smiled. So, Princess Ada. She laughed immediately. That sounds strange. It sounds perfect. Ada leaned against him. The night air felt peaceful, comfortable, safe. Everything she had dreamed of without realizing it. After a while, she looked toward the village. The same village that once laughed at her. The same village that once made her cry. The same village that now celebrated her. Life was funny that way. Sometimes the people who doubted you most become witnesses to your greatest victories. Obina wrapped an arm around her shoulders. What are you thinking about? Ada smiled. How grateful I am. The prince kissed her forehead. So am I. Years later, stories about Ada and Obina would still be told throughout Enugu. Children would grow up hearing about the muscular blacksmith who married a prince. Many would focus on the romance. Others would focus on the royal wedding. But the true lesson of their story was much deeper. It was a story about believing in yourself when nobody else does. A story about courage. A story about kindness. A story about refusing to change who you are just to please others. Ada never became a princess because she changed. She became a princess because she stayed true to herself. And in the end, that made all the difference. Together, Ada and Obina built a life filled with love, laughter, and purpose. King Ease eventually stepped aside, allowing Obina to become king. When that day came, Ada became queen. Not because she was born royal, but because she had earned the respect of an entire kingdom. And from that day forward, nobody laughed at Ada Nwosu ever again. Instead, they spoke her name with admiration. The name of a blacksmith. The name of a queen. The name of a legend. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.